Hi everyone, welcome back to my channel and I hope you're doing well. So in today's video I wanted to do a revision video for English literature and language. So I just completed my GCSEs and I was part of the first year who had to do the new spec where it was graded 9 to 1, 9 being a double A star. I got 2 8s in English, so 2 A stars, and I just wanted to do a revision video to show you exactly how I revised for English and what I did to get those 2 8s. So yeah, I hope you enjoy it and I hope it helps. The board I studied was 8'S, so it was a Welsh board, and I had to learn 3 books and 18 poems. 3 books I studied was Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, Romeo and Juliet, and Inspector Calls. I'm sure a lot of schools actually do Inspector Calls, whether it's a different exam board, but yeah, I also studied these as well. This is what my folder looked like. So yeah, there's quite a lot, but this was for 2 GCSEs, the English Lit and Lang. So this folder is quite messy because obviously I finished my GCSE, so on the last exam I literally just put everything in here, but I just wanted to show you some things that I did to help me get those results. Poems, we were given an anthology and we had to annotate the poems, but I think the first tip from to give to you is don't just use your poem anthology to revise. So make separate PowerPoints, separate Word documents, any posters or anything to help you revise, because although you'll have the poem there, in the exam you're going to have to memorise one off by heart. So if you can make your notes on a separate sheet, you won't always have to look at the poem, you'll look at the document you have, but without the poem, just the notes you need. So I've done this in several different ways. I have done this, I'm not sure if you can see, but this is for some poems. So for example, The Manhunt. I had written the title at the top, and we've got marked for AO1, 2 and 3 for poetry, and I had just written basic notes on context, language analysis, my own opinion, and I would always remember that opinion, the adjective, verbs, just the language analysis that I would need. It would just help me know exactly what I would memorise and what I don't want to memorise, because there's no point memorising the whole poem, even the one that you're going to get in front of you. You're not going to write about everything, whereas if you remember small bits from each poem and know how to lay it out, you'll be absolutely fine. And I did this for every poem and it really helped me, hence why I got the 8 in English Lit, because I knew when the poem was there. We got Sonnet 43 and I knew exactly what I had practiced and what I had written about in previous work, so I just wrote about that. And to compare, I did the poem of Valentine, I think, and yeah I did it about that, and I knew exactly what I was remembering from previously and wrote about that. And what I would say, especially for poetry, so for poetry I also wrote on PowerPoints the poem, the name, and then on separate slides I wrote AO3, AO2 and AO1, so I had something for every bit that I needed. And it wasn't chunks and chunks of writing, you have to make sure that you're able to memorize it. So I had 2 sentences for each one, and if you're able to learn that, you can develop it during the actual exam. So about Sonnet 43, I remembered basic words from the poem, and I knew that when I did my practice essays, I knew I was able to develop that. And if you can do that, then that's good, because you don't have to remember chunks of it, you're just remembering key words. Another tip for poetry, as well as all the other ones, is try and do as many practice exam questions as you can, because my teacher, what she did, she was literally an amazing teacher. She had written out for the 18 poems a question for each one. It was literally just replacing that poem name with another one, but it was obviously different for different themes. And what I did is I practiced all 18. I'm not even joking, I literally have essays of all 18 poems, and the ones I wasn't sure of, I would always get my teacher to mark. So that way I knew exactly what I was going to write for each essay. No matter which one came up, I was able to do that. And when you have to compare, you can remember that essay. So when I practiced the Valentine essay, I knew exactly what I would take out from that to compare it with the Sonnet 43, and that really helped. And you can always go to your teacher to remark it so you know exactly what grade you're getting. And I think that's so important for lit, because you want to make sure that you practice all these questions beforehand so that when you get into the exam there's literally no surprises, or you won't be scared. Because if you can practice, like for example for Inspector Calls, a practice question for every character, what more can they ask? At the end of the day, one of those 2 questions, like for my board, that I can get will be based on a character, so I know I will be okay. So I practiced a question for Mr. Burling, Mrs. Burling, Sheila, Eric, Gerald, so that way when I went into the exam I wasn't as scared. And I was lucky to get my question on Mr. Burling, and I had already done a whole practice essay on that, so I just had to basically plan it out in the exam room for 5 minutes, and I was able to get on straight away. It's the same with Romeo and Juliet, because I did practice questions, or I basically planned it out for each character. So for example for Romeo, as a PowerPoint, I went through the whole book and I chose about 8 quotes, and obviously you can remember all of them or you don't have to, just throughout the play that I would remember, because with my Shakespeare questions I would get 2 questions, one based on the extract and one as a whole. So for the whole one you need to use your memory because there's no other way. So I just remembered 8 for about each character, and I wrote, for example, one of the quotes is tears augmenting with a fresh morning dew. I wouldn't remember all of that. I would just remember tears augmenting and dew, because you need to use PEE, and the way you write it you just don't want to use the whole quote. I would write where it is in the play, so I wrote at the beginning, and I wrote the type of analysis it was and went in depth, but I didn't go too much in detail. I wrote it as bullet points so that way it would stay in my head, and then in the exam I remembered exactly what I needed to. So I was lucky that I got Juliet, and my teacher had done a practice essay for that, and I had managed to get a 6 in that, but then obviously with the improvements in the real thing I managed to get an 8 overall, so I was really happy with that. And same again, I just started with the quote, what is your will, and explained what that was about, just so I would remember, and I did that all the way throughout the essay, throughout the plan for every character. And I did this exactly for Inspector Calls and Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, because as long as you know your quotes you will be fine, honestly. Like, I found Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde so hard, but once you go through your characters and understand the plot you will be fine. So I remember doing loads of practice questions for Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde and all the other characters. For Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde, I asked my teacher to print out some practice questions, the ones with extracts, because I found that quite hard to analyse, and she just printed it off with the question, and I used to just annotate loads. You wouldn't need that many in the exam, but I just did it for extra practice, and I would always get her to check it. And I think practicing loads of extract questions will help, because I would, for example, remember one of the quotes here, for example, trembling sinner, and that way, even though that's in the extract, when I analyse it I can use it as a quote for the whole question, and that would really help. And it helps you to understand the book as well when you practice different extracts, because you would have to know exactly where it is in the play, because you get marks for that, the novel, so you would get extra marks for that. So my biggest tip is to make sure you practice loads of exam questions. My teacher created this, but you can create this yourself. Oh, it's so hard to see. It's just for each play we studied, for each play, novel and book we studied, she did a character profile with all the different characters, and she chose out main quotes, and she chose literally so many, and I would underline the ones that I would use and what I would say about them, just quick short words, so that I would be able to memorize them, and it would be easier for me rather than me having to go through the whole book and do it. But if you were to do it yourself, it's a great way to revise as well, and to create little character profiles with a little summary of who they are, how they are at the beginning, middle and end, because you would get loads and loads of marks for saying how they change. Like, you can get a lot of marks just from using 1 or 2 sentences saying how they were at the beginning to the middle to the end. And if you were to back it up with quotes and evidence, you would get so many more marks. So just try and have a summary for each character for the different books that you study. For language, I didn't really do much revision because I wanted to focus on the literature side, because I kept getting 4s, so obviously I needed to bump that up. But for language, I just did loads of practice questions. So there'll be like loads of different stories that my teacher found, and she'll just make random questions up to ask, and I will just answer them. But also I think doing loads of creative writing would help. So just find different titles to write about and give yourself a time limit of 40 minutes. So I used to set myself every few days, I would find a random title online and would just do a whole practice question, practice story on that, and I'd give it to my teacher to mark, because they're not looking for the most detailed creative writing, they're looking for one that's realistic. You get more marks for it to be realistic and more approachable and has more emotion and feeling, rather than about aliens or guns or whatever like that. So just try and make it as realistic as you can and just keep practicing that. And for literature, we also had fictional and non-fictional, so we had to either write like a letter, speech, and we would be given 2 that we had to write about. So we had ours on a formal letter and a speech. So just make sure you practice out the different layouts. For example, when to use yours faithfully, yours sincerely. So just keep practicing a lot. And I think the biggest reason I got to 8th was because of practicing essays or questions or memorizing quotes for English really helped. So I think just trying to get the gist around the book or understanding it will help you so much to write your answers better. And you don't have to memorize 30 quotes, because that's not going to get you the top marks. The best way to get the best mark in English is how you write it. Structuring it right will help, because last year in year 10 I couldn't write anything. I used to get 4s because I was not able to structure out my essay properly. I didn't have intro, conclusion, and if I did, it would be very basic. My PEEs wouldn't be structured properly. I would have it all over the place. I didn't have enough points or enough detail. But this time what I did is I got my teacher to write a whole practice perfect answer, and I just used that format for when I was writing it. So they're going to be different every paragraph, but just knowing exactly what you need will help. So writing out your point, then your evidence, then explaining it, then zooming in on one word, and having a structure like that will help you, because in English you can't get the top marks for just writing basic. To get the top marks, although you can use basic key terms, but it's the way you write has to be well styled for you to get the top marks, and it takes time to know. Like, I didn't get it in that 1 second. I did loads and loads of practice questions. So like at the beginning of September last year I was at 4. By the end I got an 8. That's literally from a low C to an A star, and it is so capable. It's capable for anyone doing that, as long as you just practice and put the work in it. So yeah, I really hope you enjoyed this video on how I revised for English literature and language, and I'll see you next time. Bye.